this week. I just got done preaching at the first Mass of Father Madison Hayes, who was ordained last evening. His first Mass was at St. Andrew Parish. First time I've been back there in many years. And so it was quite lovely. And whenever you are with at an ordination, which is marvelous, and to have another priest in the Archdiocese and also for the military services, in this case the Air Force, he'll go on to be an Air Force chaplain. You think back on your early days, and kind of how things went for you when you were a Father Young priest. And, we sometimes make mistakes when we first start out something new, anything, whether it's ministry or anything. It's all part of the learning process, isn't it? So it was that immediately after I was ordained, I was assigned temporarily to my home parish of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I've told you some aspects of that story. And that same summer, the same readings come up. The 3-year cycle, they come up every year. It was this set of readings. It starts out with Elijah going across the desert. And I was sort of musing on Elijah's experience and crossing the desert, how he just, prays for death, and he lies in the broom tree, and there's the angel, and he wakes up, and there's a jug of this hearth cake. There's a hearth cake and a jug of water. And I mused to the people there, and I got real excited, and I said, what is in this hearth cake? Really, think about it. What is in this stuff? After only 2 helpings, Elijah the prophet walks 40 days and 40 nights across some of the most inhospitable territory on the planet to the Mount of God, Horeb. And I said, here's the mistake. If anybody knows the recipe for this hearth cake, let me know. Big mistake. Big mistake. The baked goods began arriving the next morning. Soon they covered the kitchen table, and then the countertops in the kitchen. The dining room table was next. I kid you not, there were enough carbohydrates to feed a small village for a month and then some. And the crown jewel was Rita Wachorek. I don't know how many of you know Mrs. Wachorek. I don't even know if she's still with us, but she's a wonderful woman. I'll assume she is. But she's a wonderful woman. And she was, she met Ken right after World War II, and they moved over. She's from Bavaria. And if you can imagine German Hausfrau, that is Rita Wachorek. She's a living saint of incredible proportions and oozes a holy joy. And she showed up and presented me with a confection that weighed about 10 pounds. And she looked at me, she says, "Well, Vater, I don't know what a hot cake is, but would you like a German Apfelkuchen?" And she sets this confection on the table, and it bows under its weight. It was the most glorious thing you've ever seen, and oh, so tasty. That one I did not share. She's wonderful. And I learned that day, be careful what you ask for from the pulpit, because the people of God are outrageously generous and will provide really all that you need and more than you can imagine. And I think this is echoed very loudly in our gospel, this idea that God will provide for you and for me all that we need and more than we can imagine. Keep that in your mind. Look at this as we continue reflecting on the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, what's known as the Bread of Life discourse. This is week 3. And in the wake of feeding the multitude, Jesus reminds his listeners that just as God provided for the Hebrews in the desert, so he had provided for them in the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes. And it got their attention. It was a work of power. It was a miracle. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Deacon Mick pointed out some really wonderful things about it last week. It got their attention, but now he is upping the stakes. He's moving beyond bodily food to the bread from heaven. And those that eat this bread will never die. But Jesus is very unique in all of the preachers that have preceded him. He doesn't allude to and make references to other sources. He doesn't need to. He is the source. And as Bishop Barron says, Jesus comes preaching himself, and nowhere more so than here. And I cannot imagine, and I cannot help but imagine Jesus pointing to himself as he says these words, "This is the bread that came down from heaven." I can't read these without seeing him making that gesture. I wonder if he really did. I'm going to ask him at the end of this life. And he is all we need, and more than we can imagine. As he says, the bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world. And what does that mean? He's introducing these terms for the first time, and it's tough because the people that are listening to him don't have the context. And sometimes we who do sometimes miss the meaning because we've heard them so many times. Because eventually we know that these words will become concrete in the upper room when he transforms the Passover supper into the very Eucharist we partake of in the holy sacrifice of the Mass right here, right now, from this altar. As such, it is appropriately referred to as the supper of the Lord. The Eucharist, then, is the source and summit of all that we are as church. Everything we do as a parish flows towards the Eucharist, and everything that we are flows out from the Eucharist. It is the central focus of the worshiping community, of the sacred assembly. That's why the altar has pride of place. It's at the center, because the Eucharist is at the center of everything we do. And at their last meeting, we had a wonderful pastoral council meeting here about 2 weeks ago. It was just, you could see the Holy Spirit just doing its thing. It was really kind of amazing. And I was asking them, two things. There were two questions I brought to them. First, I thought it was going to be a side note. But I said, as we're kind of emerging from COVID, given the little blip we're going through now, and we're going to keep all our protocols in place, but as we emerge from the pandemic, and remember, and I am very convinced that this whole thing of COVID is there is something diabolical about it because it is diametrically opposed to what we are as a community of faith. If you think about it, what is COVID all about? Fear and isolation. Fear and isolation were the endemic qualities that pretty much governed human relationships. What is the Eucharist and what are we all about as a people of God? We gather and we share communion. We're united at the very level of who we are, that level of trust. So it's very different. And so it's important. And so the pastoral council, I said, how do we emerge from this? And as the conversation went around, it became very clear and it became very evident in one voice, and it has to be the Eucharist. We have to focus on the Eucharist, the sacrament of unity, the very source of our unity. And there were all kinds of wonderful ideas that came up of how we might make that real in the life of our community, whether processions or expanded adoration or our particular missions to focus on that, and so on and so forth. There are going to be lots of neat things coming up. Keep posted on that. It's so neat. And they said everything we do, of course, the second question, which we only had about 15 minutes left in our time, was, okay, how do we integrate this into what we're going to do for our 50th anniversary? Which is, as you know, I don't know if you know this yet, we're going to have to put out a newsletter once a quarter because there's just too much going on to just keep it just in the bulletin, unless we want a 15-page bulletin. And we're going to celebrate for the whole year. We're going to begin on October 4th, which will be our actual 50th anniversary, and the Archbishop is going to come and celebrate with us. And then for the next year, we will celebrate our 50th year. And every quarter, we're going to do one service, one social, and one spiritual exercise, or ministry, or event. And we're going to focus, and the Eucharist is going to be part and parcel of every one of these. It should be a lot of fun. It should be very interesting. Stay posted on how that goes. And I think the pastoral council, and I think the Spirit that spoke through them so very powerfully has it right. We come here this day such as we are. We gather, we share our stories, we break the bread, we are sent. And in so doing, in this Eucharist, in union with Christ and one another, we receive all that we need. And more than we can imagine.